Check out the branch named 4.4 Differentiating Between Tablets and Phones Start. In the application's current state, we have two separate setting screens, a class named Settings Activity 1 that extends Preference Fragment, and a class named Settings Activity 2 that extends Preference Activity. Settings Activity 1 is what we want to use when users are on a mobile device. Settings Activity 2 is what we want to use when users are on a tablet. So basically what we want to do is check to see what kind of device it is and then inflate either Settings Activity 1 or Settings Activity 2. Lucky for us, this is surprisingly simple. The Android SDK is designed to look in certain folders depending on what the screen size is. So we can create a special folder that will only be looked at if the screen size is above a certain threshold. We can store a Boolean value inside the folder, and then that way if the screen size is large enough, the Boolean will be true. If the screen size isn't large enough, the Boolean will be false. We can then use that Boolean to write some simple if-else logic in items activity and then decide which class will be inflated, either Settings Activity 1 or Settings Activity 2. Here I am back in Android Studio. Before we start, make sure you have the correct branch checked out. 4.4 Differentiating Between Tablets and Phones Start. The way the Android SDK differentiates between what folders to look in is with certain naming conventions. For example, I can name a folder a certain way, and it will only look inside the folder if the screen width is above a certain value that I designate. I'll show you what I mean. First, we're going to create a new file that we want the project to look in when the user is on a phone. Expand the res directory, right-click on the res folder, go to New, Android Resource File. Name it ATTR. ATTR is short for attributes. The resource type is values, and the directory name is also values. Inside here is where we're going to put our Boolean. Open a new tag, write bool, I'm going to call it isTablet, and set it to false. This values folder is where the project will look under normal circumstances. We're designating normal circumstances as when the user is on the phone. So there's no special naming done to this folder. That's what I want you to notice here. There's nothing special with this folder. There's no special naming. Now we're going to create a new folder that's only going to be open when the screen width is above a certain threshold. Right-click on the res folder, go to New, Android Resource File. Also name this one ATTR. The resource type is values once again, but here's where it gets a little different. Pay close attention to the naming. Write values-SW600dp. That stands for values, screen width, 600 dp. Or in other words, don't look inside this folder unless the screen width is greater than or equal to 600 dp. Now inside the secondary ATTR file, I'm going to put the exact same Boolean, but I'm going to set it to true instead of false. Now here's what's going to happen when the project runs. Android will look into the res folder. It'll see that there's two different values directories. It's going to read the name of each values folder and then see that everything inside this one will have preference over the standard values folder if the screen width is greater than or equal to 600 dp. This is a really cool feature of the Android SDK. This is actually the same process you use to accommodate different screen sizes on phones. Now you're probably wondering, why did I choose 600 dp? Why not 500 or 400 or even 1000? Information about screen widths and what's recommended for accommodating tablets is found in the Android documentation. I'll quickly show where you can find that information. Visit this URL. Notice the URL takes you to this section of the page, the Add Orientation Qualifiers section. You can clearly see right here that 600 dp is recommended for tablets. Let's go back to Android Studio. Now that we have our Boolean, we can use it to decide which class to inflate, Settings Activity 1 for phones or Settings Activity 2 for tablets. Open Items Activity. Scroll down to the On Options Item Selected method. This is the code that runs when the settings option is selected from the menu. So this is where we're going to want to put our if-else logic. First, we need to get a reference to the Boolean. I'm going to use the val keyword since it's not going to be changed. Reference the project resources by writing resources. Call getBoolean since that's the data type of the resource that we're trying to retrieve. And then the ID of the Boolean, which is r.bool.isTablet. Now we just write our if-else logic. So if tablet size is true, then we want to call nav settings activity 2 because that would mean we're on a tablet. Else we want to call nav settings activity 1 because that would mean we're on a phone. That's it. Let's run it and take a look. I'm going to run it on the tablet first. I'll navigate to the settings screen. Great, that looks good. We're seeing the split screen. Now I'm going to run it on a phone. I'll navigate to the settings screen, and that's good too. So everything is working as we expect.